You're listening to The Valley Current.
But it was such a weird coincidence to see Peter Attia's podcast about this generic drug, I guess, that he was pushing metformin last year. This year, it looks like he's pushing, or at least arguing, that there's sort of another rapamycin that he thinks is interesting. He's doing self-experimentation along with that other PhD speaker. That's why I sent you that link, because I thought, man, I've never heard of this stuff.
That stuff has been going on for 15 or 20 years. What he's wanting to do, as I indicated, has nothing to do with the aging process itself. What he is doing is what you and I do, and that is we do the things that we think without very much evidence will increase our longevity, or to put it more in a understandable way, keep away from things that are going to do us in or do us harm. And that has to do with longevity. It has nothing to do with the aging process, which should be obvious. I mean, if you stay away from salt, for example, and also from refined sugar, you do that not because there is evidence that has anything to do with interfering with the aging process. It has to do with the hope for reduction of likelihood of cardiovascular disease, let's say. And that's a good thing because it hopefully increases your longevity. But it has nothing to do with the fundamental aging process, and that's what's missing in that entire article of his. It's not only his belief system, but the belief system of most people in this field.
Do you think they're like overselling sort of these drugs, or what might be called this magic snake oil?
Yes, that's been going on for years. Look at this fellow, can't think of his name now. He lives in the Bay Area. And he ended up, like several people do in this field who are good academics, they finally realize they can make a fortune if they advocate the use of some product or some lifestyle arrangement. And that's very common.
Well, people love the idea of taking something, whether you call it a nutrient.
Yes, of course.
Right. They just love that idea. There's no question about that, right?
Well, of course. And that's why these people go to the bank with millions of dollars in their pockets, maybe even billions in some cases.
But if you think about,
remember the days of Geritol?
That product did pretty well. I mean, that product was on the market.
It made a lot of people rich, and it didn't do a damn thing in respect to changing the inevitable aging process.
Well, do you think that it's sort of more like psychosomatic? If you take something, somehow you're just going to feel better?
Yeah, of course. Of course. That's been the history of human behavior for millennia.
I mean, people definitely want to believe.
Back to the earliest recorded history.
So I put this chart up because this is one of the charts that they use in the show notes, where they talk about kind of the 9 sort of markers, if you want to call them markers of aging. I don't know if they're markers, but they say stem cell exhaustion.
Well, it's an arbitrary choice of markers.
Right.
We can replace them with lots of other things. Telomere attrition and cellular senescence is my area.
Right.
But there's no evidence that they have anything to do with the aging process.
You're saying they're more like the consequences of the aging process as opposed to the cause of it.
That's more likely, yes.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
I mean, you can pick all kinds of things. The chart is just a piece of artwork that has nothing to do with serious reality.
Well, people want to believe
This has been going on. People have wanting to believe this kind of chart since recorded human history. When the first record was, the first record was an article, was a belief by one of the first writers in this area. Wasn't an author, he was a king, Gilgamesh, believed that he finally said that if you can't cure sleep, in other words, if you're forced to sleep every 20 hours or 15 hours,
right?
If you can't conquer that, then you can't conquer death. You can't conquer aging. That was one of the first beliefs. Then another belief that was initiated about that time in Japan was to bathe in a solid gold bathtub.
Right.
So it's that kind of stuff that you can list by the hundreds going through literature, up to and including the fountain of youth. And on and on and on. In more recent years, the injection of testicles from young monkeys or young goats, which made a fortune for a guy in Oklahoma, I think. I have an article about this in my book, where he made a fortune. He had an assembly line inoculating men with extracts of goat testicles. He made a fortune, and he was so popular, he ran for governor of the state. Fortunately, he lost. But there are many, many examples. You could write a series of books on what has been offered up as interfering with various processes of aging but not of longevity determination, but aging.
Do you see these 9 categories that they put up before we go to a different related topic? Do you see these 9 categories as helpful just to frame a discussion? Because I don't know if they're overlapping each other, like genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, altered intercellular communication. They probably all overlap each other, right?
Well, why doesn't he include lung dysfunction, heart dysfunction, kidney dysfunction, prostate dysfunction, mammary gland dysfunction, ovary dysfunction, and on and on? I'll name every organ, every system in the body. Why are they missing?
Because I think he wants to stay at a more molecular level than at what might be called organic level. Cellular
senescence and cells and mitochondria are not at the molecular level.
Okay.
Nutrient sensing is not the molecular level.
Okay.
It's just a hodgepodge. There's no uniformity. There can't be any uniformity because what's missing is the second law.
Well, second law of thermodynamics, the law of physics.
Yes.
Which biologists may not really necessarily want to buy into because they want to think it's all biological process.
Yeah, that's
right?
Probably true.
Right.
Biophysics, you can call it biophysics. But the etiology of aging, as you know, is my belief, although there's no solid evidence for it, because no granting organization on the planet is willing to first of all, understand it, to say nothing of not emphasizing the conduct of research in the area.
Well, that's a point they make in the podcast, which is they think this rapamycin stuff should be tested in a more formal way, but the FDA won't allow it on human subjects.
There's a huge literature on rapamycin.
There is?
Yes, it was discovered 15 or 20 years ago. There's a huge literature.
All the patents have expired.
It came, I don't know whether you know the origins, but...
No, I don't know it.
It came from a substance that somebody extracted from soil from Easter Island.
Okay, interesting.
But it has been shown, apparently with some evidence, that this rapamycin has some effects on several biological pathways.
Okay.
But it has never been demonstrated conclusively or with any proof at all that it has something to do with aging. It may have something to do with some, as is true for many materials, it may have something to do with biological pathways that keep us alive and benefit some of those pathways that keep us alive, and consequently it may add to our longevity. But it has nothing to do with the aging process. And that's
they talk about the mTOR pathway, mTOR, small m, all caps TOR.
Yeah, it's the same problem. It's just a constant repeat over and over again, hundreds of thousands of times in the past 1,000 years or more, of somebody arbitrarily choosing some lifestyle, product, or set of circumstances that they believe, with little evidence, usually with no evidence, but then efforts are made to provide evidence, that event or product will have something to do with the aging process. And nothing has. Zero. Absolutely zero. We know of nothing that interferes with the aging process. Nothing at all. What people claim, like Kaberlein believes, that extends longevity, has been known for 150 years. We know how to manipulate longevity in many animals by changing the temperature of their environment, by manipulating the accessibility or lack of accessibility to food, and in some organisms, crowding conditions have a lot to do with longevity. Overcrowding reduces longevity. So we know you can manipulate longevity, and you and I know it from common sense.
Right.
You can manipulate longevity by throwing somebody under a bus.
Well, they make the case here that they think that something happens when you take this rapamycin that ends up improving some activity with your mitochondria. What exactly that is,
well, let's assume that that's correct.
Yeah.
Let's assume that that's been proven.
Right.
That tells you then that this, whatever system is involved, or whatever biological pathway is involved, that pathway has something to do with longevity determination, as does every other pathway.
Right.
That can be manipulated in a similar or other fashion. But it doesn't tell you why things go to pieces or decrements occur in vital biological systems that result in the aging process. Because these people don't understand that aging is unique to humans. It doesn't occur in any other animal species except humans and the animals we choose to protect in zoos and domestic animals, etc. And I've discussed this before. You do not find any aged animals under feral conditions. And if you do, it's because of some interference with their ecology, usually as a result of human intervention. But even then, the extremities of aging that we experience with humans and animals that we protect never occurs in the wild, because animals are eliminated soon after reproductive success by predation, disease, or accidents. I was talking the other day, a fellow contacted me from Canada. He's an ichthyologist, and he agreed with me, although he was surprised to hear it for the first time, that where on this planet the greatest biomass exists, which is in the oceans,
Mm-hmm.
that no one has ever demonstrated an aging marine animal.
I thought that lobsters live for like 400 years. There's a film
Yes,
about
but they don't. Of course, that's a good example of an animal that doesn't age.
Right.
It's not immortal because, as with every animal species, there is a constant likelihood of death as a result of accidents, predation, or disease.
Right.
We have revealed the aging process because in our intelligence, if you want to call it that, we've learned how to manipulate disease, accidents, and predation to the point that we revealed a process that teleologically we were never intended to see. So we've created this condition.
So I made this statement to many people. I said, look, my mom outlived her dad by like 20 years. Her dad died in his late 60s. She dies at 91. She outlived her mom by like 15 years. So her mom lived to maybe like 75. She lived to 91. And so I say to myself, can I possibly outlive my mom by 15 years? She dies at 91. Can I do what she did and repeat that? Because my dad said on his dying deathbed in the Navy hospital, he said, look, I've outlived my father by 18 years. You should be so lucky to outlive me. He died at the age of 90. That would put me at 108.
Yeah, but there's a good explanation for that.
Yeah.
The explanation is that your parents and my parents and your grandparents and my grandparents all had a very high likelihood of death as a result of some infectious disease.
Right.
That was tuberculosis in particular. That was the leading cause of death during the early part of the 20th century and probably further into it. We have essentially eliminated causes of death attributable to infectious diseases as a leading cause of death. Even the COVID-19 cause of death is not a major cause of death in developed countries.
Well, it's comparative in a way to what you just described as happening back in the 1920s, right? The tuberculosis was probably less impact in terms of number of deaths that worldwide than what's happened with COVID-19, right?
Oh, no.
No? Worse? Tuberculosis was far worse?
Leading cause of death. COVID-19 is not a leading cause of death. 650,000 people died in this country over the past, 2 years or so?
Yeah.
Well, that's not a leading cause. You have to cut that in half at least to 300,000 people dying in one of the 2 years.
Okay. So what were the numbers?
You discover that 650,000 people died in 1 year from cardiovascular.
What were the numbers for tuberculosis back in the 1920s?
I don't remember what they were, but
you're saying they were bigger.
They're enormous.
Oh, okay.
You can easily find out online, but I don't.
Oh, I didn't know that. So you're saying, look,
there's not only tuberculosis, but all of the things that we have vaccines for today and for which we have antibiotics. The result of those two developments have essentially eliminated infectious diseases as a cause of death in the 10 leading causes of death, and even more in this country and other developed countries. We don't see people dying from infectious diseases anymore. It doesn't happen, statistically at least. I think the first 20 causes of death, none of them is an infectious disease. It's in the first 20. And the first 3 or 4, 100 or 50 years ago, were infectious diseases. Polio, TB, rubella, measles, mumps, and the epidemic, the 1918 flu.
So in a way, I think what you're saying is we've removed a lot of the causes, the medical conditions, and we're improving hygiene and flush toilets and all that jazz. And there aren't horses running up and down a street to move manure around and cause all sorts of other problems. We have other forms of
public health measures have to be added to that list of antibiotics and vaccines.
Right. So we're hitting.
And also something else, which didn't happen in the last 200 or 300 years, but something else that's very significant is cooking.
Right.
When cooking developed, that reduced the likelihood of human deaths caused by infectious diseases that were transmitted by food and animal products.
Right. So you could say as we evolve, we will hit some human limit because all these things that we're causing, I mean, we have other things that now cause like car accidents and plane incidents and other stuff like that. But there's some sort of limit on longevity. But these guys are trying to argue that rapamycin is potentially a 50% game changer in mice and dogs and wherever else they're testing. And they are begrudging the FDA for not allowing some sort of test. They're doing their own testing. I don't know where they're getting the chemical from, the molecule from. I don't know that
it's available. There's some chemical houses that make it because it's profitable.
I mean, they make it and sell it at retail, that sort of thing.
Yes, you can buy it on an open market. It's not restricted.
Oh, okay.
But it's based on a belief.
Right.
It's based on their belief, their hope.
Well, the test that they said was persuasive is they gave it to dogs and then tried to examine the dogs for periodontal disease. And they said that had an actual measurable difference, because the one thing I noticed from...
Why did they choose periodontal disease?
Well, I don't know, but I have to tell you, I think there is some truth to the idea that as you age, if you haven't really taken care of your dental situation, which for my mom, she didn't, and as she lost more and more of her teeth and didn't get, replacements and didn't get, sort of all the stuff that people now do, she just gave up on it. Everything changed in terms of the ability to chew food and take advantage of food. So it kind of changed her diet in a way, maybe for the worse, maybe for the better. I don't know when you think about it. A lot of stuff had to be chopped up and ground and blended, that sort of thing.
There used to be a belief way back 60 or 70 years ago that horses and other ungulates.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode of The Valley Current.